This is a transitional reading. It's from Teaching a Child the Art of Confession by David Shumat. It is best not to begin with Adam and Eve, he said. Original sin is baffling, even for the most sophisticated minds. Besides, children are frightened of naked people and apples. Instead, start with the talking snake. Children like to hear what animals have to say. Let him hiss for a while and tell his own tale. They'll figure him out in the end. Describe sin simply as those acts which cause suffering and leave it at that. Steer clear of musty confessionals. Children associate them with outhouses. Leave hell out of the discussion. They'll be able to describe that on their own soon enough. If they feel the need to apologize for some transgression, tell them that one of the offices of the moon is to forgive. As for the priest, let him slumber a little more. That's such a fitting piece for leading us into a deeper reflection on the topic of good and evil. That's a concept that emerged more formally in a tradition that was practiced ages ago. Although I will be talking about Frank Baum and his wildly popular work of fiction, this first story I want to share with you is actually true, and it goes like this. Once upon a time in 7 BC, before the Common Era, a child was born in an area known today as Afghanistan. This child grew to be a priest. He was responsible for the praying over of offerings and the singing of hymns. However, the longer he presided as priest, the more he felt the need for reform. It is said he was horrified by bloody sacrifices to multiple gods, frustrated by stifling formalism of religion, of ritual, and had a desire to deepen his commitment to a faith that had more to do with ethical and moral values than priestly teachings. Furthermore, that first part was from Sacred Writings of World Traditions. Furthermore, the person believed that upon death, all individuals would arrive in a better place and a superior one that he regarded as a utopia. He also conceived of the idea of God as an antagonist. Hence, the devil, the personification of evil, was created 7 BC when heaven and hell were emerging as a concept. So this priest went to the ruling lord of the land and he expressed his ideas. 900 years later, the opinions originally conceived by this prophet, known as Zoroaster or Zarathustra, had evolved into an established religion that was adopted by many individuals. Today, those who abide by the teachings of Zoroastrianism have greatly diminished worldwide. There are still people who belong to Zoroastrianism, and yet the concept of good and evil that emerged from this tradition has had a lasting influence on Judaism and subsequently Christianity. In universalism, we believe there must be. We're not sure what happens upon death. Some of us believe that's it. Others have a high hope that there is a heaven, but really hell is not part of this discussion. We can locate this teaching from Zoroastrianism. In the beginning, there existed 2 spirits. They were twin spirits. One, the principle of good, the other of evil. Of the 2, neither the thought, nor the teaching, nor the minds, nor the wishes, nor the words, nor the acts, nor the laws, nor the souls are ever in agreement. In Judaism, evil involves forsaking God or going against the law of God. That's evil. And in Christian teachings, evil involves causing harm. These are the teachings that have been carried forward from the ancestors that went way back to before the Common Era. Let's see how good and evil emerged in contemporary culture, especially in a book of fiction, The Wizard of Oz. I think most of you know this is an American folk tale written and published by Frank Baum in 1890. He was born in 1856 in Madison County, New York. He was quite the eclectic individual, not at all the boy his father wanted him to be. So when Frank was 13, his father sent him to Peeks Hill Military Academy on a hilltop town overlooking the Hudson River. It was the original military headquarters of George Washington from 1776 to 1778. When Frank disembarked from the boat at the dock of Peeks Hill, the town that was built by the Dutch, he stepped onto pavers that were bright yellow. Much to Frank's misery from the very beginning, he trained not to fight some foreign legions because there was no war at the time, but to fight the Native Americans. He was told he would, quote, fight the awful savages and the hostiles, as they were called, who out west blocked freedom and progress and the birthright of Americans. Wow. So this was being indoctrinated into this young boy who very much had a personality more like Ferdinand the Bull in a children's story than a military. 13 years old, a year later, in the second year of his training, while being beaten with a cane for daydreaming, Frank bent over, clutched his heart, and at the age of 14 had a heart attack. The yellow bricks led him back to the boat, then back home. In subsequent years, he wrote and produced plays. One play was arranged by his Aunt Kate and performed in the Unitarian Church in Syracuse. Frank grew older, went on to create a newspaper, edit another one, to run a country store, but get this, he spent more time telling stories than selling goods. So that didn't go over well. Later, he authored a series of children's stories. One was Father Goose, and of course, The Wizard of Oz. So this is what I find fascinating. There were many influences on Frank's life, but one of the most profound was his introduction to Maud Gage. He later married Maud in 1882. Very unusual for the times. The two wrote their own vows. And guess what? Maud did not say she agreed to obey her husband. Mind-blowing for the times. Together they raised 3 sons. Maud was a loving spouse. She was supportive and sensitive like Frank, yet she too had a mind of her own. And let me tell you, she had to have a mind of her own. Quite frankly, she had no choice because she was the daughter of Matilda Jocelyn Gage. Now, if you know your women's history, women's rights history, Matilda Gage was the outspoken third pillar of the 1880s lead proponents for women's rights. She, along with Susan B. Anthony, a Quaker who attended a Unitarian church in Rochester. You see why I'm bringing this up? There are links here to Unitarian Universalism. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a Unitarian born in Johnstown. Those 3 traveled the country on behalf of women's rights, and especially the woman's right to vote. Before meeting Frank, Maud attended Sage College on the campus of Cornell University, which was in its 6th year of the co-ed experiment, whereby women were housed not in the same hall, but on the same campus as men. It wasn't easy for Maud. She experienced the wrath of the young men on campus, where all of these young men knew who her mother was. Half the young men thought the push for women's rights was a joke, a grand opportunity for ridicule, and the other half thought it was a menace. It was a threat to society that needed to be stamped out. There were drinking songs and terrible insults created against Maud, and especially her mother Matilda. The Cornell Sun newspaper ran this song: "There is a gay maiden at Sage who flies into a terrible rage. If one says in a crowd in a tone a bit too loud, 'Matilda, may I ask of your age?'" Do you see what's bubbling up for the Wizard of Oz? Maud grew ever so distraught, and the unmanageable aspects of life among the young men who taunted her grew nearly intolerable, especially when word spread that her mother, Matilda, was coming to speak at Cornell. Would the bullying ever cease? It is said that years later, when Frank endeavored to write Kansas to Fairyland, that was the first title. The original title, Kansas to Fairyland and then Wizard of Oz, he was inspired to make the main character in his novel a young girl, partly based on the stories told by Maud, his wife. Subsequently, the Good Witch of the North was inspired by his mother-in-law, Matilda, who influenced him greatly. Frank Baum wrote in his novel the following: "Won't you go with me?" pleaded the girl, Dorothy. "I cannot do that," replied the woman, "but I will give you my kiss, and no one will dare injure a person who has been kissed by the Witch of the North." How tenderly Frank portrayed Matilda's love for her daughter. I mean, who wouldn't want a kiss of protection, or silver shoes, as it was in the book, or red shoes, as it was in the movie? Frank, too, had experienced discrimination firsthand. For example, aside from all that he experienced in being sent to a military school, the disappointment his father had that he wasn't more macho. When the two wanted to get married, Maud and Frank, they couldn't do so in a church, since none would open their doors to the presence of Matilda Gage. Of the many reasons for society's lack of warmth in welcoming Matilda, there were two objections pertinent to clergy. One, Matilda's adopted faith was theosophy, meaning God wisdom, founded by a woman, a Ukrainian-born woman, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. Theosophy was a mix of Western science and Eastern mysticism. Do you, again, Unitarian Universalism, we adhere the results of science. Do you hear a little bit of our history in this as well? It was defined as a search for the center of oneself, using all the knowledge of modern magic, they said, including the understanding, get this, of this magic, electricity and magnetism. Blavatsky created theosophy as a threefold quest for the establishment of a universal fellowship of humanity, for the forging of an understanding of all religions and sciences, and for the finding of the keys to the unexplained and the mysterious. Again, do you note a faint whisper of theosophy in our beloved tradition? Blavatsky studied the lives of great prophets such as Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, Moses, Abraham, and Jesus, whom she greatly admired as, quote, she wrote this, one of the greatest, grandest figures of human history. She became a U.S. citizen and published a two-volume opus. Again, can anybody guess? If you know your women's history, you'll know this one, I bet. How about Isis Unveiled? That was 1877. The book revealed the eternal secrets of the infinite mind through an investigation of the Egyptian goddess Isis. The archetype, Isis was the archetype of the sacred and divine feminine, a prime symbol of ancient matriarchy, the mother of the gods and the great lady of magic magic, Isis was also the mystic model for Christianity's Madonna. Now back to our exploration of the Good Witch of the North. Frank's mother-in-law, Matilda, had also studied the Native Americans, especially the concept of the mother rule among the Iroquois, and she touted the power of culture and matriarchal structure. Can you imagine how this went over in a very patriarchal society? Needless to say, clergy in the United States were appalled at Matilda's faith understanding. It was too radical for the times. In many circles today, I dare say, it might be too radical for many people today, not in this room. The second reason why Frank and Matilda's daughter Maud could not wed in a church was that at gatherings of women's rights, activities from around the state of New York, Matilda spoke of an unmistakable link between the teachings of the church and the accusations of witchcraft. So a lot of what I'm sharing with you is from a wonderful book, Finding Oz. Finding Oz by Evan Schwartz. I encourage you to read this. It's so fascinating. You won't hear a lot of our Unitarian links, but when I was reading it, I saw our connection. So, from the book, as soon as a system of religions was adopted which taught the greater sinfulness of women, the saying arose, one wizard for every 10,000 witches, and the persecution for witchcraft became chiefly directed at women. The church degraded a woman by teaching her to feel conscious of guilt for the very fact of her existence. How many times have I been in worship services where I have not heard a female pronoun or been referenced at all? It's all about the Son of Man. The church degraded a woman. The extreme wickedness of women, taught as a cardinal doctrine of the church, created the belief that she was desirous of destroying all religion, witchcraft being regarded as her strongest weapon. Therefore, no punishment for it was too severe. Often called a witch, Matilda was a graduate, get this, a graduate of Clinton Liberal Institute in New York, the university conceived and funded by the Universalist Church in 1831. Clara Barton, a Universalist and founder of the American Red Cross, was also a graduate of Clinton Liberal Institute. Years later, it was said Matilda became accustomed to being called all sorts of things. She took it all in stride because she had studied history. She wore the insults as badges of courage. There's another link, a lion with the badge of courage, and wrote, those condemned as sorcerers, witches, and heretics were in reality the most advanced thinkers of the ages. So by the time Frank Baum published The Wizard of Oz in 1890, he had witnessed many unjust acts and much unkindness, the telltale signs of oppression, and certainly instances many would regard as evil. However, look at this, the great wizard in the story, when the curtain was removed. Now, he was supposed to hold life's mysteries, right? But when the curtain was removed, he had no power. No power. But he did remind the individuals on this journey that we already have what we need to survive: a brain, a heart, courage, the power to find our way home, and most importantly, friendship for the journey of life. Frank Baum died in 1919. Maud happily promoted the movie version of The Wizard of Oz when it was released in 1939. She died in 1953. Grateful for the words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love, I'll close this morning's message. I hope you'll return next week and the week after that, on October 30th, come dressed for part 2 on this evil Oz and the wisdom of witches. Thank you.